Welcome back, everybody. Now, in a previous video, I covered the top 8 deck list for the 2004 box tournament, but there were so many good players in that event and so many really cool decks that came out of that event that I wanted to do a video talking about the metagame as a whole and covering some of the decks and looking at some of the lists for the players who didn't quite make the top 8 in that run. So that's what I'm going to do today, and we're just going to jump right on into it here, starting with number 9. It's going to be a Muck EX deck. Looks to be a very standard Muck EX deck. With a lot of similarities to the one that we showed on the channel here. It looks like he plays the String Charm, Aranberry, Full Heal. And a lot of my testing since I put that video out, I really do like the higher String Charm count. I really do like the Team Aqua's hideout being 3, even 4 in that deck as well. I think the Full Heal and the Aranberry are really good, but they're situational in certain matchups. But overall, a really solid deck. I really like Muck EX in this format. I think if you hit the right matchups with it, it's just such a strong deck. 10th is going to be another Muck deck from the UK. Once again, I think this is a very similar, very, very good Muck deck. Yeah, I don't think there's anything in this list that I would change. I think it's absolutely perfect Muck deck. And everything you're debating with Muck usually comes down to just 1 or 2 cards. Usually somewhere around the String Charm count. Is it worth playing like Full Heal in the deck? A lot of the times with the supporters, the energy counts, the Pokemon, they're all pretty much identical with a lot of it, but I think Muck is just so well positioned in this meta. You do have a little bit of a rough Gorebyss matchup, but there's just so many free wins you have with the deck as well. And it's not surprising at all that we saw 3 manage in the top 10. So 11th going to be a Blaziken deck. I know Aaron tests with Zaya a lot, so I expected to see a lot of similarities there in the list. Overall, really solid Blaziken deck. I love that he maxes the Copycat, that he maxes the Stevens here. I do think in Blaziken, you really do have to run the 4 Dunsparce. I love the 2 Ditto here for the Gorebyss matchup, but I really do think you need 4 Dunsparce in a lot of decks in 2004. Really maximize those odds of getting your good starts. And then I played 12 Fire 2 Warp. Jason Klaczynski played 12 Fire and 3 Warp energies, and I really do think that's right. Not only does that give you a 15th energy, an extra energy drop, an extra discard with Delcatty, but just those 3 Warp energies can be so strong in certain matchups as well. Aaron did offset this by going 2 Switch and a Warp Point. He also had the weakness card, same as Zaya. Yeah, all in all, just really, really solid Blaziken deck. I think Blaziken is one of those decks where you'll see, it feels like a 63 card deck, and you just got to decide where you want to make those cuts. We saw Jason Klaczynski play like Town Volunteers in there, but not play Blossom. I think there's a lot of different little arguments you can make, and it's really interesting to kind of look at some of the differences and similarities between the Blaziken list, and then once again see where some cuts and changes were made as well. 12th is going to be from the UK. That's going to be a Gorebyss Lanturn deck. Once again, it looks like a really, really standard Gorebyss Lanturn. I love that he has some love for Banette in here. I think the reversal Warp Point count, you can do a lot of different things with. 4 reversal, 2 Warp Point, I think 3 and 3 is perfectly reasonable, especially if you're expecting some special condition decks, like Beedrill, for example, or Cradily, is perfectly reasonable. And then you also have, like, Jake made the top 8 going 4 Warp Point, 2 reversal. I'm not as big of a fan on that, but I think there's not necessarily a right or wrong way with that. Did the same ball counts, too. The 1 Desert Ruins versus 2, I think, is really interesting. I think playing 1 Desert, you just kind of generally accept if they play Counter Stadium, you're going to be out of luck. But against decks like Blaziken and Gardevoir, if you can hit that 1 Desert Ruins early, it's going to be pretty unlikely they're going to bounce it. Yeah, all in all, I think really, really solid list. I love the 4 Stevens, 4 Copycat. I think that's essential in almost all of this. Personally, I'm a little bit bigger fan of Underground Expedition and then TV Reporter. I probably would have swapped those counts, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to go 4 TV, 2 Underground. And then those 2 Desert Shamans, I think that's... Personally, I've never liked Shaman a whole lot in Gorebyss because typically Gorebyss is going to be a very, very aggressive deck. And essentially, other decks will play Shaman to try to slow Gorebyss down or put them off of something, where with Gorebyss, it's kind of the opposite. It's like you always are aggressive, you're always attacking, so you're not really trying to put your opponent off of something because you're already the more aggressive deck. You just, in a lot of cases, just want to keep that steam going, and you don't necessarily want to play Shaman and potentially put yourself into a bad hand when you're already ahead in the game. So personally, I never liked Shaman in the deck, but I can certainly see situations, especially in close games or close games against other Gorebyss decks, where maybe that Shaman would come in handy. 13th is going to be Nino playing Gardevoir. Nino's just a fantastic Gardevoir player. We featured him on stream a couple of times. Had some really, really good games in there. Just didn't quite make the top 8 this time around. All in all, really solid Gardevoir list. I do think, once again, anytime you're doing these Stage 2 decks, whether that's a Gardevoir, a Blaziken, a Swampert, even with that Delcatty Magneton engine, I really do like some sort of combination of Underground Expedition and Oracle in the deck. Essentially because for Oracle to be good, it basically requires Delcatty. And you can be in awkward situations where you have maybe open Dunsparce Oracle, and you kind of want to strike and run, but then you kind of also want to Oracle, and you can't do both. Underground Expedition is one of those cards that's just going to be really good on its own. So my personal preference is 4 Stevens, 4 Copycat, 3 Underground, 2 Oracle. And you're going to see people do a lot of different things, completely dependent on space and I guess their own personal preference on it. For example, for this, we saw Nino go 4 Stevens, 3 Copycat, 3 Oracle, 1 Desert, Shaman. And then I think on some level you can justify a higher Oracle count in these decks where you play 2-2 Delcatty and a 2-2 Magneton, because you're putting so much more into that Delcatty Magneton engine than, say, a Blaziken that plays just 2 Delcatty, and you don't necessarily always have the energy to discard. So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it there. Other thing I do want to note is Nino did play the 1 Magnetic Storm, so he's generally trying to take advantage of those decks that play maybe 1 Desert Ruins, like that Gorebyss Lanturn deck we just showed, where it's like, hey, if you're just going to play 1 Ruins, I'm just going to play 1 Stadium, and I'm going to bump it, and then I'm going to come out ahead. And the other thing I want to note is he split the Magnemite line. I like this. I think a lot of players don't think enough about that, where you could essentially split the basic count or the stage 1 count without really affecting your deck or your consistency at all, but giving you a few more options. I think that's great. Personally, in Gardevoir, I do play 2 of the Magnemite that snipes, just because Gardevoir doesn't have a way to hit the bench. So I like having that random spark option, especially in a deck where I already have Dunsparce to paralyze, so I don't think the Thundershock Magnemite is as useful as it might be in other decks, for example. But all in all, I think really, really solid. The only thing I do want to add, and this has been my personal experience, and I think Nino probably had a little bit of this in his testing as well. If I'm playing a slower Stage 1 deck, I won't say slower Stage 1 deck. If I'm playing a Stage 1 deck, sometimes these large EX decks, like Gardevoir or Swampert, can be incredibly challenging if they get a decent enough start without having Desert Ruins to soften them up a little bit. And I found in situations that their damage output is going to be better than mine playing, let's say, a Gorebyss deck. And on top of that, they've got so many different ways to kind of mess with the damage output cap. They've got Blossom, for example, to heal a little bit, and then they've got Pokemon Nurse in here. Oh, Nino didn't play the Nurse, but a lot of the variations will play something like Pokemon Nurse to completely heal it off. And if you don't have the Desert Ruins to soften up the EXs, it can be a lot more challenging of a matchup, especially if you're staring down a very early Gardevoir, very early Swampert, very early Blaziken, for example. So something to really keep in mind when you're building different non-EX decks is your Desert Ruins count. I don't think you need 3, but I do think you just got to remember that EX decks can be very challenging if you only play 1 Desert Ruins, or you completely omit it and don't play any Desert Ruins. All right, moving along here, HighFlyer number 14. Played Exploud Beedrill. He won a 2004 tournament with this a little while back. I love the concept. I think it's really, really good. I think Exploud in general is very good, and then you have Beedrill not only to help in that Magma matchup, giving you that grass typing for Team Magma's Groudon, but at the exact same time, Exploud just basically puts your opponent on a clock saying, hey, if you don't win in usually 6 or 7 turns, I'm going to straight up just win the game on that. And Beedrill essentially tries to buy you a couple of free turns. I do think there's enough lock decks in 2004 that people are taking it a little bit more seriously. So you are seeing some higher warp point counts. I know we featured 1 Lanturn Gorebyss deck so far that played 3 warp points. So people are being a little bit more serious about it. The only thing I want to say about this is I love the concept of the deck, but something that I've seen with some of his games, and I've noticed with playing the deck is if he gets rolling, it is such a scary deck to play against. But to find the room for everything that he wanted to play, because he's playing 2 stage 2s with no Delcatty, no Magneton consistency engine. He has to play ATM Rock for the Exploud. And then he's got techs like Lure Ball, the 3 Brainy's Compassion, which are all great techs, but to fit all of that in, he's had to cut his consistency down so much. So he only plays 3 Copycat, 3 Stevens, 3 Underground, and then 1 Desert Shaman are the only draw cards in the entire deck. So when a lot of decks, personally, I like to play, if I don't play Delcatty Magneton, I like to play 14 to 15 supporters in the deck. If I do play Delcatty Magneton, I still like somewhere in the 11 to 13 range. And he's playing no Delcatty Magneton, and he's playing 10. So in my opinion, that's like 4 fewer of the supporters than I feel comfortable with. And you also see it in other areas where Exploud is colorless. It really wants to take advantage of that friend ball. Everybody's playing Dunsparce, but he had to cut the friend ball count down to make room for some of these other spots as well. So I love the deck, I love the concept, but I do think he's got some consistency issues. But even with that, managed a 3-3 record, very close to the top 8, just a single game off from it here. All right. 15th is going to be a Gorebyss Metagross deck. Tyraniboah. Love this. Everything about this deck I think is really, really good. I do think, once again, a little light on the supporters for me. I would love a couple of TV Reporter in here, maybe a couple of Professor Oak's research. But I think his list is really, really good. Like, there's nothing in this that I'm like, oh man, that seems off. I think you can make some arguments, maybe go switch over Warp Point. But all in all, like I said, I think everything like that is just really debatable, really meta dependent. I love the deck. I think the Medicham is a really cool tech. Not only does that help you cover some weaknesses of the deck, it gives you a really high damage output attacker. The one thing that I struggle with when I play Metagross Gorebyss is I have a really, really hard time convincing myself why I should play Metagross over Crobat. And it's not that Metagross is bad at all. It's solid, but it does have some weaknesses. It does have its only attack is a flip attack. You can never guarantee how much damage you have. And then on top of that, you really want to play metal energy in the deck because of the metal typing with the Metagross, but then that kind of messes with your energy line because the metal energy doesn't really do anything for Gorebyss. And you can argue that Metagross is incredibly good in certain matchups, like Gardevoir, for example. But you're already playing Gorebyss, so your deck, regardless, should already have a pretty good Gardevoir matchup. So, like I said, I think the Metagross is solid. I have a hard time finding a reason to go into a tournament playing the Metagross over the Gorebyss. But I love the deck. I think it's a fantastic deck. I think he's got a really good list. Yeah, it's a little awkward in the current metagame. I think if the Deoxys Metagross was out, it would change the deck so much, and you could do so many different things with it. Tech-wise, consistency-wise, and it just, unfortunately, the Hidden Legends one alone is a little rough. Alright, 16th is going to be a Blaziken. This looks to be really similar to the Blaziken list that we showed on the channel, and the video we put right before the 2004 tournament, just kind of leading up to it, the prep video. All in all, really solid. Can't say anything. Looks like a really good Blaziken deck. Opted to play the Manectric. I think you see some players that play it, some that don't. Like I said, I think Blaziken you're usually somewhere between, I would say, 65 cards. And how players kind of do those last couple of cards, I think, is really interesting. I think he's got all the staples in there. I think he does have the 2 Ditto. I think that's necessary. Personally, I like the Blossom. I think you can debate it, though. Yeah, everything looks really good. It just, the Blaziken, do you go 4-1? Do you go 3-2? How do you do that? He plays the Town Volunteers, does not play the Pokemon Nurse, for example. Yeah, like I said, I think it really, really, really good list. It's just really interesting to see how different players, what they play their Warp Energy count at, what they play their Blaziken counts at. They play Town Volunteers, do they play Pokemon Nurse, do they play Weakness Guard? I think those little differences between lists get really interesting. All right. 17 is going to be Evan Cole with a Gorebyss Lanturn deck. When we did our when I did my Gorebyss Lanturn deck for the channel, I basically took Evan's list from the first 2004 tournament and then just kind of changed some cards around in it for my liking. Personally, Evan always had a really good list for it. I don't agree with everything here. I know Evan's not a huge fan of Banette. I personally like it. I think it's really good. He went with he played a Medicham, which I like the Medicham. I think you make good arguments for Banette. I think you make good arguments for Medicham. He went with the Medicham. I don't really like the Ninetales. I think Evan just liked Ninetales as a Pokemon and wanted to play it in the deck. I don't think it's particularly great in the 2004 format, since decks are not as EX heavy as they used to be, and most decks have a pretty easy way to play around it. But other than that, he went the 4 reversal, 2 warp point. Once again, I think it's really interesting to see how people play that around. Supporter lineup, I love his supporter lineup: 4 Copycat, 4 Stevens, 3 TV Reporter, 2 Underground. For my like, I always get a little nervous on it. I probably would have played one more supporter in there. And I'm a really big fan of 4 Underground and then like 2 TV Reporter, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to flop it around a little bit. He went with 2 fastball. I think everybody plays that a little differently. I think the ball count's another thing that you can really debate with this deck. I think I went 2 master, 1 fast, 1 friend ball. But once again, I think you can debate that so much. He did go with the 2 desert ruins. I like that in here as well. All right, 18, Nick Robinson. He went with the Lanturn deck. 2-3 drop. Nick is your 2016 national champion. Messaged me before the event, said he wanted to play. I think he messaged me on the Friday beforehand. Wanted to try the deck, thought it looked like a lot of fun to play. He loves playing lock decks. The only thing, and I told Nick the day before too, is I said I think he's playing a really good deck, but it's a really hard deck to pick up one day before a tournament and play it really well when you're not super experienced with the deck or the format. And I think that showed through a little bit in his results this weekend. I think if he would have had a couple of weeks to really prepare for this, really gotten into a good testing group with like Zaya or Mike Reynolds or somebody, I think he could have had a much better shot at the top 8. This is just such a hard deck to pick up one day before an event. All in all, though, I think the list is within... I think he said he changed 1 card from the list we've put in the video. So, really solid list. I love the concept, just unfortunately it was not a good day for him. Vileplume Sceptile, I love this deck. It's so much fun to play. I do think it's a pretty solid tier 2 deck. But all in all, I think the list he's got is pretty solid. I went a little bit different direction on a couple of things. I think this is another one where you can make good arguments for Underground Expedition, especially playing that lower Magneton count. I think I would go with a higher Underground Expedition count in combination with the Oracle. I love the 3 Warp Energy in there. The more I tested this, the more I think it is just such a good addition to the deck. I didn't have it in the original list. Drew Allen actually suggested it from Snowpoint Cast. He suggested 2. I played that, loved it in there, and I've been testing 3 recently. I think that's really solid as well. All in all, yeah, I think really, I love the deck. I think it's a really good deck. Just, yeah, you can get some awkward hands with it at times. It's definitely got some consistency issues. All right, 20th is going to be Kyogre. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. I've seen variations that play like 4 electric, 4 Manectric, and they rely very heavily on getting that turn 1 self-charge and then the turn 2 Manectric. And that turn 250 can be very scary. The way that it looks like Unisonraids played this one is he went with a smaller Manectric line and then he played the Lanturn. So he's going to play it similar to the Magma style deck where essentially the Lanturn's going to put the energy down. Then he's got the Manectric to move it around. He's got the Briny's Compassion to pick up the Kyogres. He's got everything in there. The only thing that I think gets awkward with Team Aqua, and I've tried to build the deck, I've tried to make it really good, really competitive. It just, every time I play the deck, I feel like Magma does the exact same thing, but better. I feel like it's got better typing. I think it's got better powers. It's got a wider array of good attackers. Because the Lanturn's not a good attacker. That 3 energy for 50 is not great. The camera up can be very good in certain matchups. The Manectric, it's an okay attacker. I'd rather have Claydol, though. I think the typing is better with Claydol. And then the Kyogre is not bad. It's similar to the Groudon, but it's so hard to keep a special condition on the defending Pokemon between turns. it'd be so much better to get that bonus damage just for adding the 20. Now, don't get me wrong, the type is good. I think if you're playing against Blaziken deck, for example, that Team Aqua's Kyogre can be really good. It feels like the deck does a very similar thing, but Magma just does it better. I wish when they were designing the sets, maybe to have them do opposite strategies or different strategies, make them a little bit more unique instead of they both do similar strategies, but that's a bigger conversation to have. The only other thing about the deck is Team Aqua, since you have to put energy down from the hand from the Lanturn, you don't grab them out of the discard pile. You have to play a higher energy count. And then just with a lot of the text and everything he's only playing 4-3. He's only playing 7 draw cards in the deck. And that is just so ridiculously low. And that's just kind of the same thing I struggled with, is by the time I got the Pokemon count and I got the energy count and I got the text that I needed, it's so hard to find room for your supporters. And I really honestly do think that you probably need somewhere between 12 to 14 supporters in this deck, even with the Conspirator, to make it viable, but it's so hard to find those spots. At some point I'm going to deck profile it when I get a list I feel good about, but there's a lot of challenges to making a good Team Aqua deck. All right. 21 is going to be a Crobat Gorebyss deck. I think this is just a card-for-card copy of what James Arnold played at the first 2004 tournament. A lot of the things James and I talked about this deck in particular because it was really, really far ahead of its time for Crobat Gorebyss, but there was definitely some things that even James kind of admitted to do it over again. There were some innovations with the deck that carried it forward a little bit more. And that was switching. For example, you got to play the 4 Copycat, 4 Stevens. I think it makes solid arguments. A lot of players playing the higher underground expedition counts, the lower TV reporter counts. Desert Shaman is kind of depends on the player. You usually see somewhere between 0 and 2 in the deck. I think the 4 Desert Shaman variation is kind of a thing of the past. Same with the ATM Rock. It's completely dependent on the player. Definitely a solid list. I think James had a very solid list. The only major thing is the 1 Copycat, 4 Shaman. I think if you switch that, I think you would be really good. Or I would say really solid deck. I really do think you need the higher Copycat counts in a lot of these. All right. 22. We've got Blaziken. Looks to be a really standard Blaziken. I think this was pretty darn close to... Okay, this list might just be Chris Phillips' list. Yeah, that might just be Chris Phillips' list from the World's Book. I don't know, somebody down in the comments I'm sure will let me know, but yeah, that might just be Chris Phillips' list. 26, Exploud. Once again, I think Exploud is such a good deck. Looks really solid. Nothing really sticks out too much to me about the list. I think you're a little supporter low. I think this is another one where you could do some sort of combination, Underground, Oracle. Love the 4 Friend Ball in here. I think you can make some debate between Pokemon Nurse and Mr. Briny's Compassion too. I think that's a really good discussion to have around Exploud. Like I said, I think it's a really good deck. I think he had a pretty solid list for it. It was just a really rough day for Exploud with the Magma decks doing so well, having all 3 hit the top 8. Gardevoir. US Gardevoir deck here for 20, I believe is 21. Once again, split the Magnemite counts. Love that. Yep, really solid Gardevoir deck. He did play the Nurse. Kind of interesting to see some of those little switches. This list is very similar to Nino's, but at the exact same time, just to see some of those little differences. Nurse, he plays the Nurse, doesn't play the Stadium. I love the 9 Psychic, 1 Lightning. I think that energy lineup is perfect for the deck. Once again, I think you can make some arguments for Underground Expedition in the deck. Really solid deck, really solid Gardevoir deck. Oh, I'm sorry, no, that was 24. 25 was James Arnold. James went 1-3, did not get the results he was looking for today, but I do think he had a really, really innovative Blaziken deck. And if you look it over, it was just Turbo Blaziken. Played the 3-3 Delcatty, 3 Ditto to deal with the Gorebyss matchup, played 4 Warp Energy in it, 4 Friend Ball. Just, the deck was... I think the concept is really solid. It's very different from what we've seen in the past. Only thing I'd argue is, man, I'd love to see a 4th Copycat in there. But essentially, it's just, I'm going to put Delcatty out as quickly as possible. Just energy draw through my entire deck as quickly as possible. And 50 spread is pretty darn good. I really do think that Ruby Sapphire Blaziken is probably the best single prize attacker in the format. It's just so strong. James goes, I'm just going to get it out as quickly as possible and go from there. Yeah, I think the concept is really solid here. I think there's some stuff you can do with it. There's some stuff that I would play around, maybe a slightly higher energy count, even going as high as maybe 16, just to work with that Turbo Delcatty. Yeah, I like it. I think there's some potential there, even if James didn't have the best day. All right, 26, another Exploud deck. Once again, really solid. That might be card for card, the same as the other Exploud player, too. Just a really, really rough day for Exploud. Which Magnemite did they go with? Yeah, I think you can also make an argument for the Sonic Boom Magnemite in here. I think there's an argument for Paralysis one, argument for splitting it, argument for going the bench snipe one. All in all, yeah, really solid deck. Once again, I think a little low on the support count. Maybe go a little bit higher there. All right, Wigglytuff. I like Wigglytuff. I just think it's so weak in the current meta. It's just so close to being good, but hit points are a little bit, the 100 HP is not great because you really would like to play Desert Ruins in the deck. But 100 HP gets hit by Desert Ruins. Do the wave is, you max at 80. Even if you can boost for it, 80 is not going to close out games. It's still going to be 10 shy of knocking a lot of things out, 20 shy of knocking a lot of things out. But yeah, he almost went similar to James Arnold, but he went with a Wigglytuff, just 4/4 Delcatty, Furret, Turbo Wigglytuff in there. I like the Furret. The Furret's kind of interesting to search out the boost energies, and then he uses Power Charge to get him back, so essentially he can boost for every single turn. I actually think that's kind of a really cool concept in there. Went very low on his supporters. I think just putting so much emphasis on that Delcatty. Yeah, I think it's a really cool concept. I think Wigglytuff struggles a little bit in the 2004 format. Just the weakness isn't great, the health isn't great, the attack doesn't quite do enough damage. 28 gonna be Gardevoir. Really solid Gardevoir deck. He does play the 15th energy in there, went with a second lightning. I don't think that's super needed. I think you can just recycle the one. I get why people play 2 lightning because you've got 2 Magneton, but I think you get away with just 1 and cycle it with Magneton. This is interesting. He went with 3 Kirlia and then 3 Rare Candy. I think that's perfectly reasonable to do, but I haven't seen a lot of people do it. Yeah, really solid Gardevoir deck. I do think the ATM Rock in Gardevoir is a little unusual. And not unusual, because people definitely play it. I don't think it's as good in Gardevoir as you see in like Blaziken, for example, because Blaziken will have that bench damage. So you might get some free prizes off that ATM Rock. If you play it in a deck where you're not actually damaging the bench, you're just kind of essentially hoping that your opponent plays too hard into Rare Candy. Especially if your opponent knows you play ATM Rock, they're usually going to be a little bit better about that. But you can definitely catch some people with it, for sure. 29, Gorebyss. This is, I think, the Jimmy Ballard, Gorebyss, Mewtwo, Lanturn, Magneton deck. The 2 Dunsparce strike me as a little bit odd. Yeah, I don't think it's a bad concept. There was somebody on TCG1 that was playing like a really crazy... He had Lanturn and Pokemon Park, so a similar concept to the Dragonite EX deck we featured on the channel. But he played it with Gorebyss, and man, with Lanturn and then like Magneton, you can get some pretty crazy numbers in there. Like it's unbelievable how high you can get Gorebyss's damage output so quickly with Lanturn, Magneton, and then that Pokemon Park. Yeah, it was really surprising. I think there's some potential there. I personally am not a huge fan of the Mewtwo. I definitely like maxing Gorebyss in any deck I play it in, but I do think the Lanturn, Magneton, Gorebyss, there's some potential there. 30th is going to be a Rogue deck. It looked like he was going for a weakness coverage deck, kind of like a 4 corners we saw in 2005. The problem with this, in this format, you don't have Scramble energy, so it's a little bit tougher to do. And the damage output on some of these stage 1s just are not as good. It's going to be really hard to get 4 energy under a Gyarados. Same thing with like Breloom, the 50. You're probably not going to get 3 energy under it. If you do 1 in a double rainbow, you're only hitting for 40. It's the damage. I like the concept of it. It's just unfortunate that I don't think you have the damage in this format. So that's pretty rough. He did go pretty heavily with the Delcatty Magneton engine as well. Played pretty low on the supporters. You see that with just one Steven's advice in there. I do like things like Pokemon Reversal. Really try to take advantage of that. Some of the weaknesses that you're going to take advantage of that weakness. Maybe be able to reversal something up. You know, maybe a Delcatty so you could hit it with Hariyama and get some easy prizes. Stuff like that. So really, I think some concepts in there. Unfortunately, I just think the damage output's so low. Then lastly is going to be 31 is going to be TimmusGG playing Wailord. Timmus won a 2004 tournament playing Wailord. A very good Wailord player. Just didn't look like he wanted to play it out today. But I think his list is actually really, really solid. It's quite unfortunate because I think if he would have played it out, I think he definitely could have had a decent day. Some of these things that I borrowed from his list when I did my Wailord deck profile, definitely the Corsola, definitely the Love Disc, and I think those have some potential in other 2004 decks as well. That Oracle concept as well, I did take that from him. I think it's a really, really solid Wailord deck, and for somebody that's not super experienced with Wailord and wants to give just kind of an initial list to try, I think this list is perfect. I am not, like I said, I don't, there's definitely things maybe I would test different here, try different there, but honestly, it looks really, really solid, really good Wailord deck. Like I said, it's unfortunate he didn't play it out because I would have loved to see how he would have ended up on the day. All right, but that's going to go ahead, wrap up the decks, the profiles here. Like I said, so many good players ended up playing in this event. Some just didn't necessarily have the luck they needed to carry them through to the top 8. At the same time, too, we also saw some players that are willing to go out on a limb and try some really crazy rogue decks, which I think is awesome because that's really the only thing that's going to separate. Being able to step out on a limb, try something different, you never know when that's going to work out. And I know that scares some people, but at the same time, too, every deck is a crazy rogue deck until it is the best deck in the format. So that's going to go ahead and wrap up the video. I hope you enjoyed it, getting a good look at the 2004 meta and what to expect when you play some 2004 games. But I'm going to cut the video off there. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you in the next video.